Hello everybody and welcome to another top 10 board gaming video. Today's topic is all about Essen Spiel. Now for those of you who don't know, Essen Spiel is the world's largest board gaming convention and it is happening right now. Essentially, I'm not able to go this year, but I wanted to make a video of my favorite announcements, previews, and all of that kind of thing. There's a huge list of all of the games that are being announced, and essentially I picked out the ones that are most intriguing for me for one reason or another. That said, again, it's a huge convention. There's a lot of games being announced, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say about it, whether it's on my own selections or your own personal ones. Please leave them in the comments below. But with that, we are going to jump right on in with my number 10. At number 10, I've got Castles of Burgundy. This is effectively a revision slash reprinting of the original game where some new mechanics have been added or tweaked and the rules have been revised to make them a little bit easier to read and follow and all of that kind of stuff. It was never a particularly difficult or a strategically heavy game for me, but people who have gotten preview copies have been reviewing it, and some of the description on the website make it seem intriguing enough that I'd be willing to check it out, but that's why it's so low on the list, because it's a relatively marginal improvement. Castles of Burgundy, my number 10. At number 9, I've got God of War, the card game. Now, I'm sure most of us are familiar with the PS4 version of God of War that was met with mass critical acclaim as well as audience love. And it's interesting to see, as always, video games being translated into a board game type situation. So we've seen it with XCOM, we've seen it with The Witcher, we've seen it with Fallout, we've seen it with a lot of different things, especially in the last few years. So I'm really curious, especially with something that was so well received by critics and regular audience members alike, to see how it would translate into a board game slash card game. Apparently it's pretty decent, but I'm going to reserve my judgment, but I'm still curious to see how it went. God of War, the card game, my number 9. At number 8, I've got Chocobo Party Up. This is kind of an interesting one because first off, it's obviously based off of the Chocobos from the Final Fantasy series, and secondly, because Squaresoft, the original developers of the Final Fantasy series, are heavily involved in the development of the board game version. This is something that I've not really seen, where the developer of the video game is really involved in the development of the board game. Not to mention it's a throwback to the Final Fantasy VII aspect in that era, and on top of that, having the Final Fantasy VII remake coming out not too long. It seems like it might be just a publicity stunt to get some more talk about Final Fantasy, but it could be something that's genuinely good, so I'm kind of curious to see where it goes. Chocobo Party Up, my number 8. At number 7, I've got Lord of the Chords. This is a fascinating game for a couple of main reasons for me. First and foremost, it's about music. You don't see a lot of board games that are about music inherently. And secondly, it's about music theory specifically. So we're talking about things like how chords harmonize together, how you actually plan out a melody, and things of that nature. You see that in the form of cards, and you've got the board that everybody's working on and all that kind of thing. I saw just some minor preview pictures and a brief description, which made me very intrigued by what was going on, so I'm curious to see where it goes and to see some more reviews roll in for it. But either way, Lord of the Chords is my number 7. At number 6, I've got Football Highlights 2052. This is, of course, a sort of continuation from Baseball Highlights 2052, a game which you guys have been recommending to me for years. Unfortunately, I still have yet to play the baseball version, but I'm really curious to see how these so well done mechanics translate into football, because the sports themselves are vastly different, and I have seen some wonderfully well done football games. So I'm kind of curious to see how it plays out and if it's as good as its baseball counterpart. But with all of that, Football Highlights 2052 is my number 6. At number 5, I've got Orly Stories. So Orly, the original release, is a Kickstarter game that kind of took the world by storm when it came out. It was a sort of underrated hit that nobody really expected to be good, and it turned out to be pretty wonderful. The Stories version kind of introduces a campaign mode to it, which I would be intrigued to see, especially in a mechanic-based game like this, where you've got primarily worker placement and that type of thing. So I'd be interested to see how that campaign progresses. Apparently Orly Stories includes 2 sort of little mini campaign story things, and so I'm interested to see how the story progression works, as well as how the 2 stories are different and how they engage different play styles. But with all of that, Orly Stories is my number 5. At number 4, I've got Drossel Chronicles. This is somewhat similar to Castles of Burgundy, where it's a little bit of a reprint slash rehashing slash update to the original Yggdrasil game. The reason that I have it so high on my list, especially compared to Castles, is because first off, I love Norse mythology. Secondly, Yggdrasil has been on my list of games to play and buy ever since I started board gaming. And third, there's been a lot of updates to Yggdrasil in the form of minor as well as a couple of major expansions, some of which is included in this new Chronicles edition. So I'm really curious to see how it all plays out and see if it's really true to the original. But with all of that, Yggdrasil Chronicles is my number 4. At number 3, I've got Terraforming Mars Turmoil. The expansions for Terraforming Mars have been a little bit hit or miss, thankfully more hit than miss, but Turmoil is kind of putting things up on their head in the sense that this is adding certain event cards that are kind of disastrous. So you have like dust storms and high radiation and things of that nature that'll reduce particular outputs, cause temperature to increase or decrease, oxygen to change, all of that kind of stuff relatively arbitrarily. In addition, you have more of the sort of take that style gameplay that you see in more Euro games, and I'm really curious to see how it fits in with a lot of what Terraforming Mars has sort of cultivated as its base of very solid engine building gameplay. And so I'm sort of curious to see if it's modular and how it can fit in and all that kind of stuff. I'm very, very curious, hope that it's good. Terraforming Mars Turmoil, my number 3. At number 2, I have a bit of a tie between Cowboy Bebop Space Serenade and Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex. These are both massive anime IPs that are being translated into board games and primarily using a deck builder. So we've seen similar things with Legendary, where we had Legendary Aliens, Predators, and then Buffy the Vampire Slayer with mixed success. And so I'm really curious to see if these capture the sort of nature of these animes and see if we can really feel like we're in the show interacting with the characters, or however it is that they particularly present it. This is kind of interesting, especially because both of these, while they've been out of circulation for quite a while, are seeing a bit of a resurgence. Cowboy Bebop, for instance, is getting a live action remake on Netflix, so that's probably part of what's going on here with the release. But either way, I'm highly intrigued to see how they do, and essentially these two anime-based games are collectively my number 2. Very quickly, I wanted to go over a few honorable mentions here. First and foremost is Welcome to Dino World. This is a fascinating game where you have a dry erase board and you're trying to sort of pen in dinosaurs. The reason that it's only an honorable mention is because it was already kickstarted and has been released and people are playing it, but it's just a really fascinating type of game. And there's another game that's currently on Kickstarter called Roam and Roll that has a somewhat similar mechanic in terms of penciling out like specific areas of a city, and it's not something I've really seen before, so it's really cool. Second up is Periodic. This is the new game from Genius Games that also was kickstarted not too long ago, and it's a game about the periodic table, which I love because science and awesomeness. But once again, this is something that already has been released. It was at Gen Con and a few other things, so it's already out there, but still awesome game, tons of fun and all of that great stuff. Last but certainly not least is Kitchen Rush. This is a revised edition of an older game, and I find it really cool because this is a real-time game that is about making food. And it's one of those things where you think about, that makes perfect sense because you're going to constantly have a new stream of orders come in, everybody's going to have their job. It's a cooperative game that behaves in real time in a kitchen, and it just sounds like something that would be really cool and a really fascinating food-based game. I haven't had a chance to play it, but I'm curious to see how the revised edition is going to be released, if they're going to have editions available at retail and all that kind of stuff. But with that, those are all of my honorable mentions. Time to get on with number 1. At number 1, I have Watergate. This is a fascinating game, especially now for a multitude of reasons, but first and foremost, the game itself is very similar to Twilight Struggle and other games of the sort where you have two opposing sides that are vying for control, influence, and all of that kind of stuff on a shared board. In this case, you have the Washington Post and you have Richard Nixon and his cabinet. Obviously, this is particularly intriguing with the current political climate that we have in the US, with the impeachment proceedings sort of proceeding for the President of the United States. States. So I'm particularly curious to see how the political aspect of this game is received, especially since Essen Spiel is taking place in Germany. I'm wondering how the game is going to be perceived by not only the people who are there, but locals, people internationally, all of that kind of stuff, and see if the fact that we are currently in impeachment proceedings that are similar to Watergate are going to sort of make the game more or less popular. It's just fascinating. But on top of that, I'm just curious if it's a good game in the vein of Twilight Struggle, Labyrinth, and all of these other types of heavy, strategic, influential type games. But with all of that, Watergate is my #1. Well, everybody, that's going to be it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this top 10 video of my most intriguing and interesting board game announcements from Essen Spiel 2019. As always, though, I am really curious what you all have to say. What are your personal favorites from that massive list of games that are coming out? Are you at Essen Spiel? I would love to hear any and all of your experiences, but regardless whether you're there or not, take a look at the list and see which ones speak to you and let me know in the comments. Tell me why and all of that good stuff. But with that, as always, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at my various social media pages as well as my Patreon page. On all of those, you can interact with myself and my channel in a whole bunch of very cool and fun ways. But with that, thank you once again for watching this. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.